So in terms of this panel, we are going to, each person's going to speak for about 5 minutes, kind of lay the groundwork for some of the big issues that we'd like to talk about with you, and then open it up to discussion, Q&A, etc. Because we can't see everybody's face at once, we're probably going to steer clear of the hand waving because we just worry we won't see you. So we've got 2 ways for you to chime in when we open it up for questions and comments. One, which we sort of prefer, is for you to just in the chat say, I have a question or I have a comment, because we'd love for you to be able to use your own voice, say it in your own words. If, however, you would rather us take your question from the chat and pose it to the panel, feel free to type the comment or question in the chat. We'll be monitoring for both, but we'll just take it kind of first come, first serve idea. So if you say, I have a question, we'll just go through and we'll turn it over to you. So that's our plan. And I'm going to share my screen now to kind of introduce the panel and what we're going to be doing. So hopefully you can see a PowerPoint slide right now. This is our title, Publicizing Folklore, a 21st Century Approach to Staying Relevant in a World of Limited Attention. Basically, the idea behind our panel was that we think we're doing some great work. We think the folk that we're working with are doing some great work, and it's a shame for it to be the tree that falls in the woods and nobody hears. And so we really want to make sure that the excellent work that's being done gets heard by as many people as possible. Whoops. So that's our goal. We're also going to try to focus on having practical strategies for you. So we hope that when you leave this panel, there'll be a couple of key things that you can start doing for yourself as a folklorist and cultural practitioner and community advocate to get the word out. Just briefly to orient us all, this committee, the Media and Public Outreach Committee, was formed a year ago and had its first face-to-face meeting literally 1 year ago at the AFS meetings. You can see the past and present members there on the right. Basically from last year, we sat down and developed a series of incredibly ambitious goals. And one of those goals was to host a series of panels at AFS. Ta-da, check mark, we did it. But here's some of the other ones. So one, you would have recently seen a press release that said, or in your AFS news feed, that we launched a press room. So now when journalists and the media are looking for us, they've got a place to go with some information to help guide them both in what the society does, but also what we do as folklorists. We're working very closely with the AFS staff right now for a complete overhaul on the web design, including branding and a new logo, and we'll start rolling that out pretty soon. We're also working on a social media startup kit. If you were at one of the first of our 3 panels with Andrea Kita and our own Virginia Siegel, then you already saw a handout they provided on using Twitter. They're going to continue to develop those kinds of resources for various platforms and social media. So keep an eye out for those, and we'll make sure those are available on our website as well if you weren't able to hit that first session. We're also, in fact, Lynne McNeill right here on our panel has been working to identify media databases, places where journalists go to find experts in particular areas, and trying to make those available to all of us so we can find journalists and they can find us. But our most exciting new development in that realm is a Find an Expert database, which will be coming soon. So keep an eye out. The only reason it's not to you right now is we had this minor thing called a virtual conference that all of a sudden had to be developed in like weeks and months. So it got backburnered just a little bit, but look in January for this. We're going to be asking you to fill in some information about yourself, about the kinds of expertise that you as folklorists, cultural practitioners, and community advocates do, and that journalists and members from the media can then simply go onto our website, type in a couple of search terms, and boom, there you are. So super excited about that one. A couple more things we're doing, and then we'll get down to it. One is we're developing press release and op-ed kits This will be part of the already amazing folklore advocacy toolkit that's been developed and has been on our website for at least a couple of years now. I think a little longer than that, it's a work in progress always. And so we're continuing to add materials that will help you develop these pieces as well, including media tip sheets, how to actually engage with the media in the first place. How do you reach out? How do you develop those relationships? And then finally, the ever-present and ever-important role and job of making sure that the entries that are related to our work reflect the current thinking and the great work that we are doing. And Virginia is going to be talking about that a little bit in her presentation as well. So without further ado, here are the 5 panelists. I'll give you a second to kind of take a look at each of them. That is the order they'll be speaking in. And it's a kind of very brief summary of what they will be speaking about. But I will take this moment now to turn it over to Lynne McNeill from Utah State University, who is our first panelist. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Lynne, take it away.
Awesome. Thank you, Tom. And thank you everyone for being here. This is very exciting. Publicizing folklore is a thing that I think is a very important thing for us to do. I know we are all aware of the fact that people in the world love the stuff we do. They love the idea of folklorists. They often don't know that we are folklorists or that there are folklorists. So this is one of those things that it is important that we do. I know it seems maybe shallow compared to our much more serious academic work, but it is one of the things that in the grand scheme of things keeps our discipline afloat, viable, populated with newcomers, and also funded and in the media and things like that. So I'm here to talk kind of about 2 things. One about, being a folklorist on television, and 2 about writing for a very general audience. I think those things are related to each other because it's really about making folklore seem appealing and boiling it down to brass tacks. And it's also a little bit about playing along, which I'll talk about in just a minute. So I'm a regular on a show called Paranormal Caught on Camera on the Travel Channel. And I've also been on shows on the History Channel and Animal Planet and the Food Network. And I have learned over time about these experiences that one of the best things we can do, a little bit, we need to lean in to what people think folklorists are. And it's hard because a huge part of our disciplinary identity is pushing back against the stereotype of what folklorists are. But the people who make television want what they think a folklorist is. And if you aren't what they think a folklorist is, they don't want you. And that sucks, but we want that audience. We want that platform. And so we play the game to get ourselves into those spaces. And that's really what's tricky. So yes, I don't know if any of you watch Paranormal Caught on Camera, I don't. But on that show, I am doing things that I really don't do in my professional life. I am saying, yes, I am an expert on esoteric lore from around the world. Yes, I have an encyclopedic knowledge of antiquarian information. Yes, I absolutely can classify that paranormal activity as spontaneous recurrent psychokinesis, obviously. And what I hope to do while doing all of that is to also work in some real genuine gems from the discipline. So yes, I will be present. Yes, I will be entertaining. Yes, I will be what you think a folklorist is, but I will also make a point to be what a folklorist actually is. So I spend a lot of time talking up the people who submit videos to Paranormal Caught on Camera. And I say things, anytime I say something that represents the discipline, I preface it with as a folklorist. So that, like as a dog whistle almost. So this is now me speaking really as a folklorist, not as a TV personality. So as a folklorist, I think that that person who submitted that video is the expert on this situation. I believe them when they say that's their grandfather's ghost. They know best. They knew their grandfather. They knew what he was like when he was alive. They know why the things that are happening indicate that it's him and not someone else. I'm gonna send the expertise to the person who's involved here and not to myself on that. I like to work in ideas, phrases from the discipline that we can have, borrowing from David Hufford. Well, when we see a cross-culturally stable pattern of belief, we can assume that there's a core experience taking place. Now, are they going to go out and buy the terror that comes in the night? Probably not. But I do think that that is a valuable thing, to be able to play along and say, I want you to keep me in the public eye, but I'm going to use that as an opportunity to drop these little pieces in. And I think also that we can't underestimate the value of simply being called a folklorist in a broadly viewed public space. So usually when I have appeared on television, they will say, what would you like us to call you? How would you like to be referred to? And if I wanted to be my most impressive academic self, I might say, please call me an associate professor of English. But no, I say, call me a folklorist and put doctor in front of my name. So that they understand there are people who are folklorists who have doctorates. And the unsolicited mail that I get, some of it's weird. But a lot of it is people saying, I didn't know there was a job that like yours. I didn't know I could do this thing. Where can I study this thing? And then I get to tell them about all of you and all the people that they can contact in the American Folklore Society and all of this stuff. So yeah, it feels silly. And yes, you will feel disingenuous to the discipline. And yes, you will need to be ready to have your family members be like, that's pretty dumb. And you're like, I know, right? But also, I get to be a folklorist on a major national platform, and that is a valuable thing. I think I'm probably talking too long, so I might set aside the question of writing for a more general audience, other than to emphasize the same sorts of things. We can't afford to ever be off-putting, and a lot of our instincts of being especially academic, having our language be fairly impenetrable. I mean, I like to think academia is moving away from that on the whole, but in an academic setting, our goal is very much to lay the groundwork of our pre-existing knowledge and impress each other with our insights. And in the public eye, our goal much more has to be like, you thought this was going to be fun, and you were right. So that's where we need to start, and then make all that other stuff seem worthwhile.
Lynne, thank you so much. That was great. So we'll just move right on over to Virginia.
All right. So again, I'm Virginia Siegel. I'm with Arkansas.
Actually, Virginia, I am so sorry. I totally botched that. We're going to Langston next, and I just blew right by that. I'm sorry. Sure? Do you mind?
No, go ahead, Langston. This gives me time to think through.
Langston, I'm so sorry. I cannot read my own handwriting. Please,
no,
Langston.
It's fine. Happy to be here. My morning, I think your afternoon. Langston Wilkins with the Center for Washington Cultural Traditions. I'm happy to be here to talk about being a folklore, expert in print media. And, in my relatively short career, I've been able to write op-eds for both the Washington Post and the Houston Chronicle, my, hometown newspaper, even though it's a big city. My work has been featured in the Chronicle, Houston Chronicle, a magazine called Hip Hop Weekly, Business Insider, and other publications. And I've, been interviewed by and quoted in the Wall Street Journal, Houston Chronicle, BuzzFeed News, Atlanta Black Star, which is a pretty awesome African-American themed publication, and more. So I have some experience. And in terms of some strategies for getting these opportunities, one, first off, branding is super important. That's the way of the age. Creating a personal brand is certainly important, for, useful for being recognized and identified as a folklorist. So, I've made sure to define my particular identity as a folklorist in a way that's both very specific to my work, but also flexible. So, my brand includes being able to talk about African-American folk culture, hip hop culture, car culture, particularly the slab culture that I work with in Houston. But at the same time, I can talk about, for instance, folk elements in popular culture and popular media, right? So I'm both very particular and very flexible in general in the way I brand myself as a folklorist, but I do brand myself, right? Connected with that is being visible. That's super important. And I think social media, and I know we'll talk about this quite a bit over the course of the session, using social media is a great way to be visible and out in front of different audiences. So one, again, I make sure to identify and brand myself as a folklorist on all of my social media pages. So you go to my Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, I also use LinkedIn, right up top, it says I'm a folklorist, and sometimes I say I'm an ethnomusicologist, because I guess that's what my degree is in. So identifying yourself as a folklorist on social media is super important. Posting on social media pretty actively has been super important for me. I've gotten many opportunities straight from people just reading my Facebook posts, right? I have friends that are journalists who are my Facebook friends. They give me opportunities, or they pass my name along to other journalists and other opportunities because of what I'm posting on Facebook. So that's been super helpful. And I think social media kind of necessitates that we present information in a concise and clear format. And I think that's what journalists and others are looking for, your ability to, be very efficient, but, thoughtful with your words. And, make sure to stay connected with the Media and Public Outreach Committee. That's a space, that's a resource for us. I got to comment on Dolly Parton and Mr. Rogers as folk heroes in the Wall Street Journal because of the Public and Media and Public Outreach Committee. So super important resource that I want to plug again. I know we'll be talking and plugging it throughout this session. And finally, a few strategies for working with the media when you get these opportunities. One, I prepare like crazy. If it's a topic in my wheelhouse, if it's about Black folklore, car culture, hip hop, whatever, yeah, sure, I can kind of talk off the cuff, no problem. But when it's things maybe outside of my typical or usual comfort zone, I do tons and tons of research. Even if it's just hopping online and like refreshing my knowledge. But research like crazy. I develop pretty clear and core talking points, right? I develop ideas that I want to get through whenever I talk to journalists, so I want to, and that's a way to keep my ideas straight as well. And I even consider phrasing or, what kind of language I want to use, how I want to articulate things. I want to make sure that I'm clear and as accessible as possible. So I think through language use as well. When you're working with media, don't stress, especially print media. Typically the things that we're commenting on aren't necessarily life or death. So you can take your time with your answers. Don't let the journalists rush you. They may try to, but take your time. Make sure you're saying what you want to say. Feel free to restate things or rephrase things. Again, this is not life or death. Make sure you get across your points in a way that you see fit or want. And finally, once something is out in the world, it's out in the world. Try not to look at the comment section. I consistently fail at that. But I've noticed that, the bigger the publication that I write for, the more negative feedback I get. Several years ago, I wrote an op-ed for the Washington Post that received mostly negative feedback. It was horrible. On Twitter, people were, calling me names, talking about my mom. It was just horrible. Now, I ended up being correct in my ideas, and I think people mostly had issues with the title or the headline, which I had nothing to do with. But again, don't read the comment section. My work on slab culture received lots of negative feedback. One, because people just don't understand the tradition, and they harbor negative or probably racist ideas about the community, right? And so I receive a lot of that negativity, and it just comes with the territory. Don't sweat it. You're an expert. You know what folklore is. You know what being a folklorist is. So don't worry about it. And finally, feel free to pass on, or feel free to pass on opportunities and pass along opportunities. You don't have to take every opportunity out there. Sometimes, you know, the topic just does not fit you. So pass on it or pass it along to someone else. And again, you know, if you need to pass something on, reach out to the Media and Public Outreach Committee. And yeah, I'll leave it there.
Langston, thank you so much. That was great. Lots of good specific pieces of advice there, as well as some big ideas for us to grapple with in a bit. So how about now, Virginia? I promise not to just burst in and cut you off. Go for it.
No, that's quite all right. And actually, I'm glad Langston went first. I was kind of counting on being able to riff off of what Langston and Lynne had already pointed out. You know, Tom mentioned at the beginning, I talked a little bit about publicizing or promoting public programming, but that was actually some thoughts we had before we really developed and fleshed out our workshops. And so I would actually direct you again, if you did not attend our 2 previous workshops sponsored by the Media and Public Outreach Committee, to do so, because those really tackle that issue in a more nuanced way. And especially TJ Smith and Jake Rosenberg's presentation yesterday. Just if you're going back to look for the recordings, it was Thursday, 12:30 to 2, and it was called Folklore 2025, How to Prepare for the Future of Digital Content. So I would encourage you actually to go back and look at that, because they actually hit every point that I would like to pass on to you, in that primarily it's leveraging the tools that are there for us, right? Not being afraid of technology. For instance, I was really actually myself encouraged by Jake's point that like VR technology is a lot more accessible than we realize. I had no idea that you could get a headset for $20. And that got the wheels turning in my own head. But and this goes back to our first workshop that I and Andrea Kita led, which if you didn't see it, that was on Wednesday, 12:30 to 2, and it was called Promoting Folklore Online, Social Media for Public Engagement. Definitely check that out. Going back to my point though, beyond just digital tools, leveraging social media platforms. And part of that is the understanding that to promote what we do, I'm coming from the perspective of a public folklorist who had that I would like to, use, especially in the time of COVID, online media and formats to engage with my constituency and my artists. And so to do that, I have to meet people where they're at. And a lot of people are experiencing and making community through social media and online platforms. Now, if you go to my organization's social media accounts, don't judge me too hard. Some of this is do as I say, not as I do, because I'm just a one-person organization right now. And as Jake and TJ pointed out, it is a time-consuming part of our work to engage with social media on various platforms on a regular basis. But with social media, again, broad strokes, part of it is knowing what each platform does and who those platforms are reaching. So social media is not homogenous. The people using Facebook are not the same people using TikTok, though there may be some overlap. And so part of our work is understanding what those, so if you intend to use them, is understanding what those social media platforms do and other online tools. First, sort of doing our own field work with those social media platforms first, so we understand how to use those tools. And again, I'm just mentioning that briefly. Both of those workshops were recorded and they really touch on these issues in a more nuanced way. And before I turn it on to the next speaker, the other thing that's really important for us to understand as a society, and it's an initiative that AFS has been working on for several years, is that whether we like Wikipedia or not, it's where people are going. It's the top hits for searches for certain terms. Actually, we talked about this last year in 2019, that I think people are using it less than they used to, but we still need to jump on this train, because if this is where people are going for content, again, whether we like it or not, we have the power to make sure we monitor and curate that content. No one else is going to do it for us. And we are the ones with folklore training. So we're the ones who need to be doing that monitoring. And editing Wikipedia pages is not as scary as you think. I'm going to share my screen real quick. Hopefully this is successful. If you are a first time, can you all see my browser right now, my web browser? Perfect. Wikipedia may seem daunting, and part of that's because it's one of those platforms where it has its own language, but once you learn it, it's really easy to use. And so to make that process a little less scary, AFS has hosted a series of workshops over the past years, including a workshop in 2015 and then an editathon last year in 2019. But those materials that we developed for those workshops are available online through AFS's website. To access this, when you sign into AFS, this information is listed as a discussion group on AFS's page. This isn't a section, but our page operates similarly to a section, so you can actually sign up to be a part of this Wikipedia discussion group the way you would to sign up for a section. It doesn't cost anything. But once you sign up for that discussion group, you can access our past workshop materials. Our workshop materials include everything from how to create a Wikipedia account, to how to make your very first edits, to sort of the rules, do's and don'ts of Wikipedia. And you can also, it's an underutilized resource, but you can also see through the group feed what people have questions about in Wikipedia, or if you need help with editing a page, you can post comments here. But part of that is, I want you to understand too, that Wikimedia Foundation wants to see this happen too. This initiative with AFS actually started several years back because Wikimedia Foundation was working with several professional societies to, because who better to curate this content than the professionals themselves. So, to wrap it up, I just want to emphasize that, again, we have to meet people where they're at to share expertise with the world. And I think Wikipedia is sort of touching on what Lynne said, you know, whether you like something or not, like, for instance, maybe a silly TV show, what matters is if you're going to reach an audience through that platform or not. And Wikipedia, we have the potential to reach a strong audience. For instance, there's been quite turmoil over the different kinds of edits made to the folk arts page, which, as you can all imagine, we have a very different understanding of folk arts than others and other disciplines. So again, just meet people where they're at and know that the Media and Public Outreach Committee is here to bring you tools and tricks for doing these kinds of things. So if there's anything you feel like we should tackle or you'd like to tackle, but you don't think you have the tools, reach out to us. Because if we can't point you to existing resources, we can create resources for you. That's what we're here for. That's what these panels are for. So, so thanks. I will pass it on to the next person.
Virginia, thank you so much. Great, and thank you for reminding everybody that this is the third in a series of panels. Ben Bridges has posted the link for the one yesterday by TJ and Jake, but the one from Virginia and Andrea Kita, I think they're still working on. I think that's what Ben said. So keep an eye out for that one. All right, so we now go to Jeana Jorgensen. Jeana, dive in. Thank you.
Thanks. I love the points everyone has made thus far. I'm specifically here to talk about blogging and just like a little bit of related social media. There are a lot of reasons why folklore should be blogging, in my opinion. It is much faster than peer review. So if you have a venue, if you have an audience, if you have an idea that you just want to get out there, blogging is a really wonderful way to do it. Now, there are obviously many platforms for blogging. WordPress is a popular one. I think it's pretty easy to learn how to use. So you have a couple options. You could always just build your own blog, have your own website, and so on. You can also blog for somebody else. So for an institution, for a company, Oxford University Press often runs blog posts by people that they're publishing their scholarly works. So that's a kind of cool way to engage. Not all blogging is paid. Much of it is not. You will probably not get rich becoming a blogger, just FYI. But again, it's, in my view, a form of service. It may never be recognized by any academic institution. And in fact, I sometimes worry that being a blogger will detract from people seeing me as a serious scholar. I don't actually know, but it is definitely a fear that I've had on occasion. But it is a fantastic way to reach people. So again, if you are working on topics that you think are of interest to either the general public or even just like a specific niche of people with a certain hobby, subculture, you name it, you can probably reach them by blogging. So, you know, where would you start? Feel free to reach out to me afterwards with questions about kind of what your specific situation is. I could maybe make some recommendations. But you would always, you know, basically do your lit review. What are people already writing blog posts about in this given topic? You know, is there sort of a thriving Reddit community, for example? What are people already saying about the topic, or what's of interest, or are you identifying a lack in what's being talked about? So there are a lot of avenues that you can take. One thing I will say is that readability is interesting, and this kind of touches on some of Lynne's points of like, we're not going to use a ton of jargon in our blogging unless there's a reason to. So I have a series on my blog of Folklore Thursday posts where I define folklore jargon so that I can then use it in my other posts and just kind of link out to it and not feel as guilty. And briefly, that trajectory, I've been running my own blog, JeanaJorgensen.com, for since 2011 or 12 maybe, just because I had ideas and I was writing my dissertation and I wanted to procrastinate. I've also written for a sex education blog. I do guest spots on various blogs. But in 2015 or 16, Patheos reached out to me. They ran a series of blogs on both faith and not faith conversations, and their atheist / non-religious channel editor had taken a class with Dundas years ago, found my blog, he just was like, you need to write for us. And I was like, okay. So sometimes things will just drop into your lap, but in order for that to happen, you have to have a web presence. So whether it's Twitter or a professional author Facebook page, and again, you'll reach different audiences on different platforms, but even just having a blog on your own, even if you only blog once a month or every other week, start to put that record down so that opportunities can find you. That is some of my advice. On the flip side, however, how do you build an audience? We can take that in questions. It is faster than peer review. You can put your ideas out there ASAP, but there's no one to stop you from putting your foot in your mouth. So I will say that sometimes it's really good to have like a blogger buddy or a friend that you kind of run things by. I definitely advise that. In terms of promoting folklore, so I'm not sure how many of you have heard of the Carter Haas School. I will drop a link to it when I'm not talking anymore. It's run by folklorists Brittany Warman and Sarah Cleto. They established an online school for folklore, fairy tale, and fantasy topics because there's a need for it. So they are drawing in tons of people who might not otherwise study or have heard of folklore for, 6-week class on this, 10-week class on that, some creative writing, some academic stuff. And so their blog posts dovetail with their educational content. So again, it's this question of like reaching audiences. Maybe they have a blog post that gets shared that draws people into the school community or vice versa. So blog posts can be used to do a number of things, including promoting your projects, getting participation, things of that nature, promoting your peers, and so on. I loved what Langston had to say about branding and being visible. I just kind of had an early on decision when I joined Twitter in 2009 perhaps. I was just feeling kind of cheeky, and so I picked the name Foxy Folklorist. It stuck, but I think it's again kind of representative of I am sometimes a little irreverent. I try to make academic things fun, and I don't take myself too seriously. So in terms of my branding, and I do talk a lot about a lot of sexuality topics. So it kind of came together in a way that was fortuitous, but again, maybe risks me being seen as like less of a serious scholar. So that's kind of like the flip side. Other things worth mentioning, are you going to blog under your real name or not? Are you going to have your institution affiliation visible or not? If you're like me and you write an adjunct train a lot, like maybe your institutional affiliation isn't the most important thing about your identity right now. I don't know. I will briefly say that you do sometimes have to worry about trolls. So again, don't read the comments. It's a thing. But I do sometimes worry about being doxxed. And I think it was Meryl at one point who messaged me and was like, there was a white supremacist quoting your blog on their white supremacist site. And I was like, So that didn't come to anything, fortunately, but I was kind of like buckling down and preparing for it too. Even if you're at an institution, even if you have tenure, you will not be protected. Universities are such large, slow-moving institutions. They don't know how to deal with serious doxing and serious trolls. So if you have people in your life that you want to protect, or you value your own life and want to protect that, just be aware it does come with some risks because of the internet hate machine and things like, I think it was Andrew Peck who wrote about this in this recent JAF follow-up, the amplification effect of social media and the news cycle. Things can get amplified and really spiral out of control quite quickly and easily. So there are definitely some pros and cons to mention here. I think I might wrap that up and then I can happily take some questions later on.
Great, Jeana, thank you. And thanks for bringing up the idea that it's not all rainbows, unicorns, and I don't know, cherry pie. I guess I'm hungry. But that we do need to think about some of the negative repercussions of putting ourselves out there. So thank you. We will definitely come back to those ideas. All right, so our final panelist is Ben Bridges. Ben, take it away.
Sure thing. Hi, everyone. My name is Ben. I'm a current grad student at Indiana University. And this year, I'm also actually the AFS graduate assistant. And so it's been great to sort of see how these things, the projects from the Media and Public Outreach Committee are really sort of playing out at the society level. So in this final kind of panel session, I'm going to talk about two things, and then we'll just open it up for some conversation with you all. So the two things I'm going to talk about, the first one is to touch on what we can learn from some of Google's analytical tools. And so rather than just doing things, trying things out without really any backing for it, you know, thinking there are research tools that are built into Google that we can actually harness and use when thinking about presenting and promoting folklore online. And then I'll follow up that with sort of a student perspective on how students are engaging with and embracing the digital sphere out there. So I'm going to share my screen to just point out some of the things involving Google. Okay. So one of the things that we were interested in as part of this committee is thinking about why do people search for folklore, and in what ways does folklore appear in news articles and things out there. And so there are two useful tools that Google has that are publicly available. So if you want, you can think about how this is relevant for your own profession or interests out there. They can help you track sort of the popularity and prevalence and location even of what people are searching for when. And so the first one is called Google Trends. And Google Trends, if you're interested in visiting it, it's just trends.google.com. It allows you to plug in a search term and then see kind of its history of when have people searched for this word. And so you can find, different moments. So this morning I was just wondering, oh, killer clowns, how long have those been around? And I think it was 2018 or 2016, I don't know, but there was that big spike in kind of killer clown scares. And sure enough, you can see the full trajectory of Google search terms since 2004, and killer clowns, pops up all of a sudden. And then since then, around every October, it kind of is resurfacing in little small doses. So I was interested in kind of, what about folklore? When do people usually search for folklore? And so here is a Google trend of just the past 5 years of when people are searching for folklore. And so it may not look like much, but then when you kind of hover over the specific dates, you realize that all the peaks can be traced to the last week of October is when people are Googling the word folklore. And while part of me wishes that this is oh my gosh, AFS must have something to do with this, I'm pretty sure it's a Halloween related reasoning why people are searching for folklore during this time. And so I mentioned that as something relevant to kind of allude back to what Lynne was saying of really leaning into what people think folklore is, of recognizing folklore generally surfaces in popular sort of Google searches around Halloween. And that is an important kind of cultural observation to think about, when people are potentially engaging with the discipline in any capacity, just even conceptually, it's going to be around Halloween is when those searches are happening. So that's just for the word folklorist, but you can try this for yourself with other words, whether it's a different genre or a different festival that you want to look into to see when people are actually looking into these things. Some of the data that I don't have presented here, but it's on the website, the Trends website, as you can see the location even of when people are, or where people are Googling these things. So I think the word folklore this past year has been Googled the most in Maine and then Vermont. Not sure what that entails and what the implications of that are, but it's interesting. You can kind of play around with some of what's on that website to think about, again, how people are engaging with the terms that we use in sort of a not disciplinary kind of way. The second thing that I will talk about regarding Google is Google Alerts. So this is, we were interested in thinking about, oh wait, I will actually, before I move on, say Google Trends now, just so you know, with folklore, this is what it looks like for the past 5 years when you include the summer. And you can maybe guess who this is. It's our lovely friend, Taylor Swift. And so setting up kind of the Google searches now, it's gonna skew it. This is almost like the zooming out of that chart before. You see the folklore now maybe has different Google searches associated with it, but just thought that is worth mentioning if you're confused by why that looks like your chart on trends.google.com. But the second one I want to talk about is Google Alerts. So this is a feature that is set up. Again, I think it's google.com/alerts, or you can just Google the word alerts and I'm sure it'll pop up. That allows you to see what news articles are mentioning certain terms. And so this is just right now, if you type in the word folklore into Google Alerts, this is the screen that you'll see. And so you can set up an alert so that every day or even every single time a news article is released that has the word folklore in it, you'll get an email notification. And so I was interested in this and thought about, okay, what, where is folklore appearing in the news media? And so I set up a Google alert for the word folklore. And if I would encourage you, if you're interested to also do it, just know you will get flooded with emails. And so they have a digest option. If you want to do that at the end of each week, you get one email that has all the articles that mention it. And sort of, I did it for 2 weeks last year and had, I don't know the full number, but a couple hundred different news articles that I had in my inbox that all mentioned folklore in some capacity. And so I went through and I did kind of an open coding kind of scan of all of them to see in what ways are people talking about folklore? Why is the word being invoked in different news channels? And here's generally what I came up with. So I'll point out that this was happening between Thanksgiving and all of our winter holidays. And so maybe the holiday category was a bit higher this time of year than it would be in like May or June or something. But these are generally the kind of topics that were talked about. So heritage, not a whole lot there. And by that, I mean kind of a critical discussion of things like intellectual property or copyright, sort of things, folklore being invoked in that conversation. Holiday, having to do with a holiday. Person/local, it's was used in a kind of a more of a rhetorical, oh, this person's part of the local folklore in the area. And then it goes on to give a biographical feature of, an individual. Supernatural, commenting on very often this time of year, Krampus was a very commonly referenced supernatural topic involved there. Sports, very similar to the person/local, a lot of, entering into the folklore of a sport. Review was things like songs or like albums, books, festivals that involved the word folklore as part of the title, or a very loose reference to this talks about Latin American folklore, and then doesn't really delve into it or unpack what that means. And then lastly, nature, some like weather or plant related news articles that comment on the relevance of folklore. Again, I think what this shows us is how journalists are commonly, when they write about folklore, what topics they are typically concerned with. And if you present yourself as a folklorist, maybe some of the initial things that they'll associate with kind of what you study with these sorts of things. Like I mentioned, this was just a 2-week period that I'm sure different 2 weeks during the year, it might come up with something different. But it's a useful feature that I recommend if you're interested in thinking about how journalists are talking about folklore out there. The very last thing I'll say, and then we'll open this up for questions, is just from a student perspective, thinking about kind of the connection between folklore as a discipline and concept with the digital media out there. So I think one of the main takeaways as a student, sort of being on this committee, is thinking about how do we present ourselves as a discipline to younger student audiences. Now, granted, not all students are in the younger category, but thinking largely undergrads, even into the grad realm, sort of how do we connect folklore out there? And just a couple comments that came to my mind. One of them is the importance, and as folklorists we know this, but the importance of aesthetics, of thinking about the way that we are presenting ourselves online visually. In just kind of conversations with my friends and other grad student colleagues, we joke about the website. You know, I'm so glad it's being remodeled, because we all sort of thought that this would be, I mean, when we look at the website, it's an outdated website. And for all of us, that was kind of when we first looked at it, we were like, is this a discipline, a society that's still active? Because that is how, for just a younger generation, what we're trained to see online, this just did not fit that model. So I don't mean for that to be critical of the website, but rather think about what audiences are certain aesthetics online catering to. And so I'm glad that, again, we're remodeling the website in order to kind of think through some of those things. And then the second thing that I'll say is, I think thinking about if you're interested in, you know, reaching out to students and getting them on board with the discipline, finding out about AFS or your organization, talk to students about it. I think that's the best way to kind of connect with students, is to ask them, you know, what social media platform should I be using? How should I be designing this website? Does this look good? Because who better to say whether or not a student likes a website or is attracted to a website than a student themselves? So I recommend just including students in these conversations when thinking about how we're presenting ourselves out there. If we're trying to attract students, get students to the table. Anyway, that's all I'll say. I'll turn it back to you, Tom, or we can open it up to the floor.
Ben, thank you so much. That was great. And some of those, that data you were showing is just fascinating. So I've been tracking the chat a bit, as many of you may also have been, and I've got a couple questions that seem to have emerged that haven't yet been answered by other people in this room. So I thought I would start there, but just a reminder, if you want to ask your own question, just say, I have a question, and we'll call on you. So right now, I think the first one that I saw was a question about web and blog. And I think it was mostly maybe Jeana, but I think many of you can comment on this. Is it enough to just have a blog? Should you also have a website that it goes with? Could you comment?
In my experience, you should definitely have a personal website / web domain type thing, like yourname.com or whatever. There are different ways to do that. But people are going to Google you. So then the question is, and this is a really good idea. So every so often, log out of all of your stuff online, or just open a new incognito window of your browser and Google yourself, because you need to know where are people landing when they try to find you. So, you know, maybe they land on, maybe you have a page on your institution's website, and maybe that's fine. But I'm firmly in control that you should have, I'm firmly of the belief that you should be in control of how you're represented online. So having your own web page, and then there's like the main page, hi, I'm so-and-so, folklorist, I do this kind of work. And then you have a couple of tabs, and maybe one of those tabs is your blog, contact me, areas of expertise, or whatever. And you can also, you know, there are other people who can talk to you about this. Set up your web page. Maybe you want your blog to be the front page of your website. People go to search for you, blog comes up first, or maybe the blog is like a side feature. So there are different ways to do that depending on what your goals are.
Oh, I wasn't muted. I'm so sorry. But now I can just chime in. Great. Thank you so much, Jeana. And of course, if any other panelist wants to chime in on any of these questions, just please feel free. There was another question about audience, and I think maybe this was answered. I'm not quite sure, but I think, again, Jeana, it was how do you find an audience for your blog? And I think you sort of answered that and said, get your friends going first. I don't know if anybody had anything else they wanted to add, just generally, whether it's about blogging or your social media or your Facebook, tips on drumming up business.
I do want to point people to some of Andrea Kita's comments from the Twitter workshop that I attended, that I believe is being shared around. But you don't want to look like you're just self-promoting 24/7, because that makes you look a little like vain or arrogant or narcissistic or whatever. So promote other people, like share ideas, find the people whose ideas are interesting to you, follow them, link them, all the things. They'll eventually notice, maybe follow you back and link to some of your stuff. So you just start to kind of build these networks.
I would add to that and just say, join in the conversation that's going on. Don't just sort of sit back and put your content out and wait for people to notice you. Like, notice other people. There's a, whether it's good or bad or neutral, there's sort of a sense of reciprocity often in things. And if someone's tagging you, that's awesome. Follow them, tag them back, acknowledge that they helped promote you. Because being a part of that sends a message, and not being a part of that also sends a message.
And use hashtags, especially on Twitter and Instagram. That's a very easy, low energy way to join, a larger conversation, super important.
Well, and I would add with tagging, especially if you're an organization that you're partnering with folks, the least you can do is to tag them in posts when you're mentioning your partnerships with them, because it leads people to their social media. And just giving credit where credit due is, I think, just one of the most important things we can do. And again, it doesn't take more than a second of your time to tag someone. It can mean the world for them, for having users find their social media platforms. And in terms of building an audience, I think TJ and Jake did a great job of addressing that yesterday as well, about sort of various strategies for who to follow and how to sort of be really active about it at first to build your initial following and get that going. It's not really my area, so I don't want to comment further on it, but I would direct you to that workshop.
Great. And I really love this whole notion of community that we're hearing. I think it's easy for us to think about this workshop and panel as being how to promote yourself or your work. But it's really everything I've been hearing our panelists speak about is how do you really lift up all of folklore, from the comments of Langston saying, hey, if it's not your wheelhouse, pass it to somebody's wheelhouse whose it is, and I think Lynne picked up on that, and really everybody. So I just want to highlight that piece. So we have a couple more questions, and then we've got some people who want to chime in, which is great. Ben, this might be a fast one, but is it possible to tell when people are, this is from Anika, is it possible to tell when people are searching for folklore, what they're searching with, like folklore or can you not tell?
It depends. So on the Google Trends, when you type it in, if you scroll to the bottom, there's often like associated with these top 5 things. And so I think folklore now, the top one is associated with Taylor Swift, American songwriter. But there's other things. I think, right, legend was in the top 5, I think. And so there are other ones that you can put in there. But you can also use the trends searching to do a full folklore and et cetera. You might even be able to just do quotes around what words you want to be included with whatever people are searching. And that could help narrow it, but it's difficult to, like, the graph is almost like a ratio rather than like a absolute number of searches. And so that's why if you look at folklore now, the July is going to be at 100 is the number that's shown. And then the other ones are going to be, dancing around like 5 or 6 at the bottom. And so it doesn't show like an absolute number of how many searches were on this day. But that information might be in there and I just don't know how to access it. So if someone does, feel free to post that in the chat.
Great, thank you. So then Louisa asked the question that a few people commented on about the potential for this to be a black hole, to take up all of your time. How do you manage this, which is, for people who aren't doing it, seems like a pretty big endeavor?
Is that for all of it? Okay, I didn't know.
Yeah, I think. But chime in. I mean, I think.
I was going to say, I'll chime in briefly on the, I don't currently have my own website, but speaking just, if you're interested in doing the analytical background before, exploring what have you for your organization, or if you want to contribute to kind of the expansion of the discipline into the public digital sphere. Yeah, it takes some time, but it's the nice thing with the Google Alerts is just kind of when you get to it, it always is sitting there, just sort of piling up for you to jump into when you'd like. But I'll turn it over to those of you who have more robust social media and blog presences to talk about maintaining those.
I mean, I'll be quite frank. If you look at my organizational and personal accounts, I'm the perfect example who's someone who is not doing it successfully. Because I've just started Arkansas Folk and Traditional Arts from the ground up. The program had been dormant in the state, and I'm having a hard time with that, and that's just the reality of it. So there are a lot of folks here who do it a lot better than I, and part of that, I think, it depends on your perspective, whether you're an individual or an organization. I definitely sort of my next move as an organization is to get help with that through like a student worker who can sort of live that life a little bit more. But I just want to be honest for people who are thinking they're not doing it successfully. Like, I will fully admit as someone who's on this panel that it's hard and I'm not doing it well.
I just want to chime in and say you can schedule tweets, you can schedule Facebook posts. I certainly do that. You know, in the morning, I think about what I want to say throughout the day, and, you know, I'll schedule a few tweets here and there, you know. But look, it can be a black hole. That's very true. You know, once you get on there and get too engaged, you can get lost and you can lose time. But, you know, just like we manage any other project or any other endeavor, you know, find a way that, you know, fits in with your schedule. But again, I think thinking ahead with all of this stuff and preparing helps a bit.
Yeah, I was going to say that basically, you know, if you manage to, you know, work on an academic article over the course of X number of weeks by allotting half an hour in the morning to write. So this is kind of the same thing. There was a time when I was putting out daily blog posts. I was also really unhappy and looking for an escape. But so, you know, it's like anything else. It'll ebb and flow. You're going to get that blog post idea that has it like super fired up, so you stay up late writing it or whatever. But, you know, I think that it'll make sense to have a couple of early spurts as you're more enthusiastic and you're building your audience, all this stuff. Like, you'll probably put in more work up front and then be like, I'm going to take a break and work on something else. You can kind of come back to it. So the idea is just to not like put it down entirely. Like, don't disappear from the web completely. I mean, I say this, I haven't written a blog post in over a month, but you know, like, don't just aim for some level of like small consistency. You know, you tweet 3 times a week, or you do a blog post once a month. Like, just don't disappear entirely.
All right, so we've got some questions. Meryl Kaplan, I think you wanted to comment. If you want to unmute yourself and chime in.
Yeah, thanks. And thank you, presenters. And I want to do a little voice of doom, which is what I think, getting known for, but I want to give you like lots of encouragement. So I exhort you, when you are approached by some media thing, if you've never heard of them, scope them out, find out who they are. Dory Noyes was just approached by venue that was very conspiracy theory and white supremacist adjacent. If you're on Twitter, you're on Facebook, you're on Instagram, it's great to get followers, scope them out. There are some very bad people who are interested in folklore, and that's especially relevant for people who do anything that can be interpreted as old-timey white people stuff. And it is less relevant for people who are doing other things. Nonetheless, there is a whole scene out there that is very much on purpose stuck in 19th century ethno-nationalist folklore ideas, and all this stuff is public domain, so they're just soaking in it. So be careful, but I don't want to scare you off entirely, because the way to beat these fuckers is to turf them out and have more good information by good people out there than is out there by them, so that the search results turn up us and not them. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Meryl. Yeah, great. I really appreciate those comments. And I like the chat that has you not as doom, but important truth teller. All right, so Emily, I think you had a comment you'd like to make?
Just one thing, and this is maybe taking it a little back to shameless self-promotion, Jeana, which you are being much more communitarian in your thoughts. But I found it very interesting reading up on getting published in trade. This is probably not true in the academic world, but there's a thing that they call platform, which is not the platforms we're talking about, but it really does count that you're out there. It does count that you have a blog. It does count that you have followers. It is something in the marketing of yourself that can be very useful. So obviously, don't stop being communitarian. I can't even say it. I'm trying to say humanitarian instead of, but you get the point that if there is something in this current environment very useful about, with obviously the cautions, but being out there and known.
Thank you, Emily. And of course, panelists, if anybody wants to chime in. But there has been a little bit of conversation about SEO. Well, all of a sudden I just went right, search engine optimization. I don't know why that went right out of my head. We have a subcommittee of the Media Public Outreach Committee that's headed up by Andy Kolovos, who is looking into that issue specifically. TJ has been working with our web designers a lot on it also. So we do have some expertise and not on this panel, but Jennifer, apologies, is it Spitolnik?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah.
Awesome. Has had some experience on it. And since there were a lot of questions about it, Jennifer, do you want to share some thoughts?
Yeah, sure. I'm just going to do some really, really basic, like 1 or 2 things, because of course I haven't like prepared any remarks or anything. So I don't want to go on for too long about SEO because it's a really, really big thing. I mean, you can have a whole career as an SEO specialist. But I have spent the last 2 years, well, not right now, but I was doing content marketing for the last couple of years. So, and you know, in my interview for that position as an editor for a content marketing firm, they mentioned SEO and I had to ask what that was. So, you know, you can learn a lot in a very little bit of time. But there's a couple of things that you want to think about. One is to do your keyword research. And you can do that. There are a number of free ways to do that. The one that I use, what I like, it's called Keywords Everywhere, and you can use it like as a browser extension on Chrome, so that whenever you're Googling something, it'll show you like the keywords and the keyword volume and difficulty and things like that. And so you want to try to use, you don't have to always, you know, as folklorists, I know that we use a lot of words that are, you know, differently, that are in common parlance, right? That are used for like myth, folklore, et cetera, you know, tradition, that are used very differently in the sort of, you know, mainstream way of talking about them. So we want to make sure that we're, if you're trying to build your SEO value, you want to make sure that you're including phrases of things that people are using, like those keyword phrases, even if it's just to say, these are not the words that we use, but then at least those keywords are in there. So when people are searching for something, they will find your site. If you are trying to build your sort of SEO juice for your website in particular, you want to make sure that you've got your metadata and your tags all in line. And again, you're going to need to do your keyword research for that. But the metadata, I think on, you know, what's that, like Wix and Squarespace and things like that, they make it pretty easy to put those tags in. And finally, you know, one thing to think about is the structure of your blogs. So, and again, remember, I was working at a content marketing firm, so people were hiring us to do this because it's really hard to find the time to do this. And, you know, it's a whole area, and it's like you could spend all of your time doing this. So please just take all of this with a huge grain of salt, because you can't spend your life doing this. You've got other work. But, you know, scheduling your posts, making a, you know, develop a content strategy if you can, so that you have a schedule of what you're going to do and when, and that you can sort of develop it out around a theme maybe for a little while. And build one big blog post, like the 101 stuff that Jeana was talking about. A great thing for her to do if she wanted to boost her SEO value would be to collect all of those into a single massive pillar blog post that she could then link to from all of her other posts. So like every time she used that word, she could link back to the, you know, or say, you know, if you're looking for a basic overview of folklore terms, here's one, or here's a folklore 101 kind of thing. And just constantly linking back to that will build it. Yeah, so that, again, you need to do your keyword research and think in a more long-term strategy. And if you want to, it's different though, if you're trying to build SEO for like your name or something, as you go out into the world and are trying to publish content, like guest contributed content, that's a different kind of strategy. So, you know, DM me if you want to hear more about that. Oh, HubSpot. HubSpot's blog is a great place to learn about all of these kinds of marketing things. They're a very reliable source that makes it very accessible. So.
Yeah, I was going to say, are you doing paid consults? I may be getting in touch.
Sure. Yeah, that's a good idea.
Tom, you're muted.
Thank you. Sorry. What I was trying to say is, Jennifer, we have a subcommittee that we would love to have additional expertise. So you just volunteered, whether you know it or not. We'll be sending emails very soon. I've got a question I'd like to ask, but before I say, technically this panel was going to end at 1:30, but we don't have anything, I think, scheduled for AFS until the 2 o'clock. We understand if some folks need to leave, but I think there's still a couple of questions out there that I think would be great to talk about. So maybe we'll stay on for another 10 minutes or so. But I'll just go ahead and first and just say thank you all for being here. And thank you so much to these panelists who have certainly, I've been working with them and I'm still learning so many new things from them. So thank you. One question I would like to throw out to the group though is, how do you say no? This gets a little bit at Meryl's point, and Langston brought it up as well, of kind of that you should be saying no. But when you're doing research, when somebody reaches out to you, what's the process that you go through to try to decide, are they going to respect the people that I work with? Are they going to respect the work that folklorists do, or not? So I just love some thoughts on that while we wait for the next few questions, if there are any.
Actually, can I make a comment? Yeah. Oh, okay. You're making me think of, I was approached by, has anybody heard of iHeartMedia, which is a huge radio? So they approached me wanting to know if they could interview me about my work with Gandy dancers, African American railroad workers, and they wanted to use some of the film we did. But the person that they wanted to interview me, one of their hosts, is a comedian. And I was like, whoa, wait a minute, I'm not sure I want to do this. And so I had a lot of negotiations back and forth with the producer. Turns out that woman wasn't available, and somebody I felt more comfortable with did the interview. And it's going to air, I'm not sure when, it might be in November. But I was a little nervous about it because it was that thing that Lynne was talking about. Certainly mainstream media, sensitive topic. So I'm like just holding my breath that they don't, do something awful. And yet the distribution is huge. So I'm just putting that out there. I almost said no, but I didn't.
I guess I can jump in. I absolutely say no, to things that I feel are or will be disrespectful to me, the communities I work with, and the field itself, right? And that's happened a few times. Of course, journalists, others don't typically have strong understandings of the field of folklore, right? So, I'm willing to talk with them and help them better understand what we do and the field itself. But at some point, if I reach a point where it's just not connecting, I just say it's not going to work. That happened very recently with a podcast who reached out to me about an episode that they wanted to do. They wanted me to be in conversation with an artist that I, really value, right? And whose work, I'm certainly whose work inspired me. And, but after going back and forth about what folklore is, what my particular research interests are, I came to a point where, I realized it's just not connecting. And so then I reached out to Tom and the Media Public Outreach Committee. And based on what I saw a few days ago, they found someone who's a better fit, right, for the particular platform. And so I think it all worked out. So, I think it's just, understand that people don't necessarily know what we do, and, try to work with them. If they listen, great. If they don't, just feel free to, move on or pass it on. That's how I do it.
I'll just add to that on a much less serious note. I was recently asked if I would be willing to join in a panel discussion of experts who would be gathered to attempt to convince William Shatner that the ancient aliens theory is correct. And because apparently he's a famous skeptic. And it was very interesting because I, very much want to hang out with William Shatner. But two, I like actually had to say to the producer, I don't think I can go on TV and point blank say, I believe in the ancient alien theory. Like, and I know that I can avoid saying that sentence and it can be edited so that it will sound like I very much still do. But are you okay bringing me there and letting me speak from a slightly fictionalized folklorist standpoint and make comments about why we should take that theory seriously rather than going there and saying, I myself subscribe to it? And they were very much like, yeah. And I thought that was like, I was like, haha, I made a tiny line in the sand that will be completely obliterated by the time anything makes it to the screen. I know that. But it's just, it is, I then find myself weighing, which matters more to me, another venue for a folklorist in the public eye or me looking ridiculous. And I think I'm willing often to look ridiculous. There are things I'm willing not to look. You know what I mean? Disrespectful, racist, you know what I mean? Things like that. But I am willing to look ridiculous for folklore. And that is a choice that I have made.
Lynn, can I also just say something? I have also looked ridiculous for folklore on multiple occasions now. And I do this intentionally, though, on Twitter because I'm trying to get more folklorists to be involved. So sometimes, like, you guys might have saw a post a while ago where I was like, oh, I didn't have enough coffee and I don't know what I'm talking about. That was bullshit. I knew exactly what I was talking about. I was waiting for other people to jump in. So I think that's okay if you're doing it. Like, for me, it's like I'm doing it for folklore, and that makes the difference. Like, as long as I am not being misrepresented, you know, like, I've done a lot of supernatural things. I just did a supernatural conference. It went really well, but there are times where I'm just like, okay, you know, like, they want to hear my ghost story. And it's like, all right, you know, like, that makes me feel kind of dumb to tell that kind of stuff. But it's for folklore, right? So, you know, again, it's a whole bunch of people who might not know that folklore is a real job. So if nothing else, we do that.
Yeah, and I also want to agree that, like, it is really scary to not have ultimate control over the final product. I understand that, but that's one more reason to have your own web domain or web presence or whatever, so that if you need to set the record straight later, you can. Like, you may not get as many views as the original thing, but at least there's something in print somewhere saying, I think I was misrepresented here, and what I actually mean to say is blah.
And I'll just add that, you know, this is actually a position that many of the people that we work with are in, right? You know, we ask them to tell us their stories, we ask them to share their traditions with us, and then, you know, maybe we're engaged in reciprocal ethnography and we're very dialogic throughout. Maybe we send things back towards the end, and maybe we don't. So I think it's useful for us to remember that we're asking people to step into this spot all the time. And now I feel sheepish because I'm like, I don't know, that's the final word. But I do think maybe we've kind of come to, oh, good, Lynne's got one more thing to bring us home.
No, this is such a terrible final word to bring us home. Well, actually, maybe it's not. What I was going to say is, like, you know, getting into the spirit of things is fun, but you do have to be careful of other people. You know, that one of the clips that I got called out for on Twitter was, I think I made the offhand comment of, like, yeah, you know, folk Mormonism is full of UFOs. It's actually not wrong, but there were I got a bunch of people on Twitter being like, hey, you know, like you can't speak for our religion or whatever. And luckily I could be like, here's 6 articles from BYU's own publications about the presence of, you know, like, extraterrestrials in Mormon folk theology and history and things like that. But it was one of those, like, whew, I mean, I'm sure I've made off the cuff comments that would be decent television that I wouldn't be able to back up in that same way. So there is, you know, as Jeana, speaking of, you know, you having a platform to defend or clarify or correct is also helpful. I was grateful that, and I ended up in a good conversation with the person who wrote to me and said that, where he just sort of ended up being like, people already think we're kind of weird. It's just hard when, you know, our actual history makes us look weirder. And I'm like, it doesn't. It makes you look more interesting. And it was a good outcome. So there is, I think, that balancing that can happen.
Thank you. So we do have one more question from Betty Belanis. Betty, are you out there?
I am.
Oh, great. There you are.
Yes, here I am. I might not have asked that quite right, but there are times when you are just not the expert. You know, you want to pass people on to the people whose story it is, who's, you know, who is the expert, the folk artist, or, you know, whoever you're working with. I know we've all had some experience with that, but it's tricky sometimes, you know. So I just wondered if anybody had some advice, experience, etc., that they want to share along those lines.
Again, I think the only, I'll just reemphasize reaching out to Media and Public Outreach Committee. I think that's why they are here. Again, that's why I got certain opportunities. So I think the one time or the few times that's happened, I've reached out to Media and Public Outreach Committee, but also considered, you know, who was in need of certain opportunities, right? You know, there are folklorists out there who need to be more visible. And I always consider that whenever I'm passing on something. But yeah, that's how I handle it.
Has anybody else had an opportunity where they've been contacted by somebody in the media and you've actually been able to bring that folk artist with you, whether just on the phone or in a video chat or something like that?
I was going to chime in once again. You know, with the car culture I work with, right? People always reach out to me and define me as the expert within the tradition, which is just not true, right? I'm the one with the degree. I'm the one who is visible. I'm the one that's accepted, right, by the mainstream, right? But I'm not the real expert. So I have several times, right, turned, you know, journalists, people making documentaries and others, you know, to the community, you know, themselves, right? You know, the people who gave me the information, I connect journalists directly with them, and it's always worked out. And I will say, you know, that's always something that we should consider, right? You know, we are experts, but there are experts, right? So yeah, just want to throw that out there.
I was just going to add one thing, and that is, this was really fun. It was from BBC in Scotland, who contacted me about Bala Kuyate, who is a balafon player and recently won the National Heritage Award. And of course, Bala lives in the Boston area. So I was able to, I mean, I was interviewed for their this was I guess blog post is not the right, a podcast isn't quite the right word, but it got up there and then I connected them with Bala. But the cool thing is, then like 8 months later, the producer got back in touch with me and said, the BBC World wants to do a whole feature on Bala. And the way Bala's hard to reach because he's touring, he's all over the place, but the way I've learned to best get in touch with him is call him on a cell phone or direct message him on Facebook. So I'm hoping that's gonna come about, and it'll be a really nice half-hour feature with very broad reach. So that's lovely when that works.
You're muted, Tom.
I just realized, sorry. I'm really good at this. Yeah, to come learn more about how we're really good with digital media and watch me flub this entirely. I think we're sort of reaching our end. There was a message from Anna Marie, and I followed up with her. We'll try to find a spot to help her perhaps locate some of this kind of work that we sometimes do, which is an interview with a folk artist, and trying to find what's the right journal, what's the right place to place something like that. So Anna Marie, text me, whatever. Langston has said, please use the Media and Public Outreach Committee as a resource. We are, that is part of our purview. Of course, we want to put a lot of things up on the web for you as well. But let me just say thank you again to all of you that came, but especially, of course, our panelists. So I'm going to start some applause. Thank you so much, you five. And is there anything the panelists or anybody wants to say before we depart?
Thanks for having us.
Again, oh, sorry, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just saying, thanks for having us.
Mm-hmm. And we can't repeat enough that if you have suggestions for the Media and Public Outreach Committee, to let us know. And also, yeah, if you have some expertise to provide, and for instance, we're pulling in Jennifer, and I'm secretly pulling in Lily Titchenen for help with accessibility in social media. So I think there's expertise here that the panelists don't even have. So reach out to us.
Absolutely. Okay. Well, thank you all again. Really appreciate it. Great to see you. See you in some more Zoom panels over the next couple days. Y'all take care. Thank you.